How does a man go from a privileged upbringing to running one of the world's most powerful crime syndicates? Daniel Kinahan didn't just inherit his father's empire. He expanded it into a global operation, flooding the UK with drugs, laundering millions, and even infiltrating the world of professional boxing. For years, he operated in the shadows, pulling the strings of an underworld network stretching from Dublin to Dubai. But Kinahan's story isn't just about power, it's about war. A war that left bodies scattered across Ireland and the UK, ignited a feud with one of Ireland's most dangerous families, and ultimately made him one of the most wanted men in the world. Despite international law enforcement closing in, Kinahan has remained untouchable, for now. But how did he rise to the top? And is his reign finally coming to an end? To understand that, we have to go back to the beginning. Daniel Kinahan was born in 1977, but from the moment he entered the world, his future was already mapped out. His father, Christy Kinahan, known in criminal circles as the Dapper Don, wasn't just a small-time thug. He was one of the first Irish criminals to transform drug dealing into a global enterprise, learning multiple languages and using business tactics that most gangsters couldn't even comprehend. Unlike many crime bosses who came from rough beginnings, Christy Kinahan was methodical and disciplined. He didn't just make money, he studied how to keep it. While serving time in prison, he earned degrees in finance and business, skills that would later help him turn a street operation into an empire. And Daniel? He had a front-row seat to it all. But Daniel's upbringing wasn't what you'd expect from a future cartel leader. While his father was building a drug empire, Daniel was living in comfort, far from the violent streets of Dublin's gangland. He attended private schools, wore designer clothes, and never had to get his hands dirty. On the surface, he was just another rich kid. But behind closed doors, he was being prepared for something far bigger than a privileged life. By the late 1990s, the Kinahan Cartel was taking shape. Christy had established strong drug smuggling routes from mainland Europe into the UK, using connections in Spain, the Netherlands, and Belgium to flood British cities with cocaine and heroin. At this point, law enforcement had their eyes on him, but Daniel, he was still just a name in the background. That wouldn't last. Daniel might not have started as a street enforcer, but he understood one key rule. Power in the underworld isn't just about money, it's about fear. His father had built a criminal business, but Daniel had something else in mind. He wanted something bigger, more ruthless, more untouchable. And as his father slowly stepped back, Daniel stepped forward, ready to take control of an empire that would soon stretch far beyond Ireland. But no matter how powerful you become, there's always someone willing to challenge you. And for Daniel Kinahan, the real war was about to begin. By the early 2000s, Daniel Kinahan was no longer just the heir to his father's empire, he was the driving force behind its expansion. While Christy Kinahan, the Dapper Don, had built the foundation of a sophisticated drug smuggling operation, Daniel was determined to make the Kinahan Cartel even bigger, more ruthless, and virtually untouchable. His goal wasn't just to move drugs, it was to dominate the international underworld, controlling supply chains, laundering millions, and eliminating rivals with military precision. The Kinahans set up their operational stronghold in Spain's Costa del Sol, a hotspot for European drug traffickers. The sun-soaked coastal region wasn't just a playground for tourists, it was the perfect base for international smuggling, with its loose financial regulations, ports that connected Europe to South America, and a steady flow of corrupt officials willing to look the other way. From here, the Kinahan Cartel expanded its supply network, forging direct connections with South American cartels. This wasn't just small-scale smuggling. Daniel Kinahan was securing multi-ton shipments of cocaine from Colombia and heroin from Afghanistan, working through intermediaries in Venezuela, Morocco, and the Netherlands. The drugs were then funneled through Spain, Belgium, and the Netherlands before flooding the streets of the UK and Ireland. But Daniel didn't just want to be a supplier, he wanted to control the entire market. Unlike many old-school crime syndicates that relied on intermediaries, the Kinahans built their own distribution network. They supplied drugs directly to street gangs in London, Manchester, Liverpool, and Birmingham, cutting out the middlemen and maximizing profits. The cartel's financial operations were just as sophisticated as their smuggling routes. Millions of pounds were laundered through a web of offshore companies, luxury properties, and legitimate businesses spanning Europe, Dubai, and South America. Cryptocurrencies, shell companies, and real estate investments made it nearly impossible for law enforcement to trace the flow of dirty money. The Kinahan Cartel wasn't just a drug gang, it was a multinational criminal corporation. With power came problems. The Kinahans weren't just dealing with police investigations, they were also making enemies in the criminal underworld. British and Irish gangs relied heavily on Kinahan-supplied drugs, but that also meant they were at the cartel's mercy. Any gang that failed to pay debts, tried to undercut Kinahan's prices, or disrespected the organization quickly learned the consequences. Daniel understood that control wasn't just about making deals, it was about fear. Under his leadership, the Kinahan Cartel became known for its ruthless approach to dealing with rivals. Assassinations, kidnappings, and brutal beatings became standard practice. Gunmen were sent to eliminate anyone suspected of being a police informant, and rival dealers who stepped out of line were wiped out. In the UK, this led to a rise in gangland executions linked to Kinahan-backed groups. Hitmen were flown in from Spain to carry out targeted killings, often using encrypted messaging services to receive orders. Many of these killings were carefully planned, with victims lured into meetings before being executed. Others were carried out in broad daylight, serving as warnings to anyone who might consider betraying the cartel. One of the cartel's most infamous enforcers, Thomas "Bomber" Kavanagh, became Daniel's right-hand man in the UK. Operating out of Birmingham, Kavanagh oversaw drug shipments and handled cartel business in Britain, ensuring that debts were paid and threats were neutralized. He ruled with an iron fist, ordering beatings and executions as needed. But the cartel's growing power didn't go unnoticed. European law enforcement agencies were beginning to piece together just how massive the Kinahan network had become. Surveillance operations intensified, drug shipments were intercepted, and pressure started to build. Despite this, Daniel Kinahan still saw himself as untouchable. He had influence, money, and a sophisticated system to keep himself hidden from direct involvement. But there was one thing even he couldn't control: war. And that war was about to explode in the most violent way imaginable. Because in the shadows, an old rivalry was brewing, and when it finally erupted, it would bring international attention to Daniel Kinahan like never before. For years, the Kinahan Cartel operated like a well-oiled machine, flooding the UK and Ireland with drugs while keeping their operations hidden from the public eye. But in 2015, everything changed. A decades-old rivalry between two of Ireland's most powerful crime families, the Kinahans and the Hutches, erupted into an all-out war, leaving a trail of bodies across Dublin, Spain, and even the UK. The bad blood between the Kinahans and the Hutches wasn't new. In the 1980s and 90s, both families were involved in Dublin's criminal underworld, often crossing paths in smuggling and armed robberies. For years, there was an uneasy peace, with both sides making money and avoiding direct confrontation. But that all changed in 2015, when a failed drug deal reignited the tensions. Gary Hutch, a nephew of notorious Dublin gangster Jerry the Monk Hutch, was once a trusted ally of the Kinahans. He operated within their network and had direct access to cartel money. But when Daniel Kinahan suspected Hutch of stealing from him, everything fell apart. The cartel issued a hit on Gary Hutch, and in September 2015, he was gunned down in Spain. The Hutch family didn't take the murder lightly. They wanted revenge, and they wanted it fast. In February 2016, they struck back with one of the most daring gangland attacks in modern Irish history, the Regency Hotel shooting. Daniel Kinahan had built an image of himself as more than just a gangster. He saw himself as a businessman, even trying to integrate himself into the world of professional boxing. But on February 5, 2016, that illusion was shattered. During a high-profile boxing weigh-in event at Dublin's Regency Hotel, a group of masked gunmen stormed the venue. Some were disguised as police officers, armed with AK-47s. Their target, Daniel Kinahan. In the chaos, cartel enforcer David Byrne, a close associate of Kinahan, was shot dead in front of horrified onlookers. Kinahan himself narrowly escaped. The message was clear: the Hutch family was out for blood, and they were willing to strike in broad daylight to get it. What followed was one of the deadliest gangland feuds Ireland had ever seen. Over the next few years, more than 20 people linked to the Kinahan-Hutch war were executed in cold blood. But the violence didn't stay confined to Ireland. It spread across Europe, with killings happening in Spain and even reaching the UK. British police became increasingly alarmed as Kinahan-backed hitmen carried out assassinations in cities like London and Birmingham. One of the most notorious killings connected to the feud happened in the UK in 2018, when cartel enforcer Thomas Kavanagh, Kinahan's top man in Britain, was arrested on organised crime charges. Kavanagh had been instrumental in managing drug shipments and arranging hits on enemies. His arrest was a major blow to the cartel's operations in the UK. The war also caught the attention of law enforcement at the highest levels. The National Crime Agency, NCA, in the UK, along with Europol and the US Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, began intensifying their investigations into the Kinahan network. The cartel was no longer just an Irish problem. It had become an international priority. But despite the growing pressure from authorities, Daniel Kinahan remained untouchable. He relocated to Dubai, where he continued running operations from the shadows. He still had money, power, and influence. However, the war had exposed him. He was no longer just a mysterious figure in the criminal underworld. He was now one of the most wanted men in Europe. And as the walls started closing in, the question became, how much longer could he run? For years, Daniel Kinahan operated like a ghost. Despite being one of the most powerful drug lords in Europe, he had no criminal convictions, no public presence in the underworld, and no direct link to the street violence carried out in his name. But as the bloodshed from the Kinahan-Hutch feud spread across Ireland, Spain, and the UK, law enforcement agencies around the world began putting the pieces together. And once they did, the full weight of international authorities came crashing down on him. By 2017, police forces in Ireland, the UK, Spain, and beyond had started to realize that taking down the Kinahan Cartel required more than just arresting low-level foot soldiers. They needed to dismantle the organization from the top. And that meant targeting Daniel Kinahan directly. The National Crime Agency, NCA, in the UK, alongside Ireland's Gardaí and Spain's Guardia Civil, intensified their focus on the cartel's drug shipments, money laundering operations, and connections to violent killings. By intercepting encrypted messages and following the money trail, investigators uncovered a vast web of corruption, offshore bank accounts, and cartel-linked businesses that stretched from Europe to Dubai and South America. One of the first major blows came in 2018 when Thomas Bomber Kavanagh, Kinahan's top enforcer in the UK, was arrested. Kavanagh, who had been overseeing the cartel's drug shipments and enforcement operations in Britain, was sentenced to 21 years in prison for drug trafficking and firearms offences. His downfall marked a turning point. Without Kavanagh's control over the UK operations, the cartel's grip on the British drug market began to weaken. At the same time, Spanish police raided multiple Kinahan-linked properties, seizing millions in assets and uncovering evidence of their high-level connections to Colombian cartels. But even as the walls closed in, Daniel Kinahan remained out of reach. He had relocated to Dubai, where he lived in luxury, far from the grasp of European authorities. While European law enforcement had been working to bring down Kinahan for years, it wasn't until 2022 that the US government stepped in. And when they did, they made it clear that Kinahan's time was running out. In April 2022, the US Department of the Treasury officially sanctioned Daniel Kinahan, his father Christy, and his brother Christopher, labeling them as one of the world's most dangerous criminal organizations. The US government froze their assets, banned American companies from doing business with them, and, most significantly, offered a $5 million reward for any information leading to their capture. This was unprecedented. No Irish criminal had ever been placed on such a high-profile international wanted list. The move effectively cut Kinahan off from the global financial system, making it nearly impossible for him to continue laundering money through legitimate businesses. The sanctions also sent shockwaves through the world of professional boxing. For years, Daniel Kinahan had quietly embedded himself in the sport, working as an advisor to some of the biggest names in boxing, including Tyson Fury. But after the US sanctions, fighters, promoters, and organizations were forced to cut ties with him. Overnight, Kinahan went from a shadowy figure in the fight world to one of the most wanted men on the planet. With global pressure mounting, Kinahan's empire began to crumble. In Ireland, dozens of his associates were arrested. In the UK, more of his drug networks were dismantled. And in Dubai, where he had once felt safe, authorities started cooperating with international law enforcement, putting Kinahan's future in serious jeopardy. In 2023, the NCA, Gardaí, and international agencies ramped up efforts to extradite Kinahan from Dubai. While he hasn't yet been arrested, his ability to operate freely has been significantly restricted. The once untouchable cartel boss is now a fugitive, constantly looking over his shoulder, as law enforcement agencies worldwide continue working to bring him down. While the Kinahan Cartel hasn't been fully dismantled, it's a shadow of what it once was. With key figures behind bars, billions in assets frozen, and Daniel Kinahan himself on the run, the criminal empire he spent years building is crumbling. But one question remains: will Daniel Kinahan finally be caught? Or will he remain a ghost, managing what's left of his cartel from the shadows? One thing is certain: the days of the Kinahans ruling Europe's drug trade with impunity are over. The cartel has been exposed, its influence weakened, and its leader hunted like never before. And as the net continues to tighten, It's only a matter of time before the man once seen as untouchable is finally brought to justice. For years, law enforcement struggled to pin down Daniel Kinahan. He operated in the shadows, using intermediaries and encrypted communications to avoid detection. His cartel was deeply embedded in the European drug trade, and despite the waves of arrests and seizures, he remained out of reach. But the global crackdown that followed the Kinahan-Hutch feud changed everything. The unprecedented violence caused by the Kinahan-Hutch feud forced law enforcement agencies to cooperate like never before. What started as a localized gang war in Dublin soon turned into a high-priority international case involving the UK's National Crime Agency, NCA, Ireland's Gardaí, Spain's Guardia Civil, Europol, and the US Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA. One of the biggest breakthroughs came when law enforcement managed to infiltrate encrypted messaging services used by the cartel. The takedown of EncroChat, a secretive phone network used by criminals, provided investigators with a treasure trove of evidence. Messages revealed large-scale drug shipments, assassination plots, and money laundering schemes, giving authorities enough to dismantle key parts of the Kinahan organization. In the UK, Kinahan's top lieutenant, Thomas Bomber Kavanagh, was sentenced to 21 years in prison for running a multi-million-pound drug operation. His downfall significantly weakened the cartel's influence in Britain, cutting off a major revenue stream. Meanwhile, in Ireland, the Gardaí launched Operation Shovel, a years-long investigation that saw dozens of Kinahan associates arrested, properties raided, and millions in assets seized. Spain also intensified its crackdown, targeting Kinahan-linked operations on the Costa del Sol, a known hub for cartel activities. But while these arrests hurt the organization, Daniel Kinahan himself remained untouchable. That was until the United States stepped in. In April 2022, the US Department of the Treasury formally sanctioned the Kinahan Cartel, placing Daniel Kinahan, his father Christy, and his brother Christopher on its list of transnational organized criminals. This move effectively blacklisted them from the global financial system. The sanctions included a $5 million bounty for information leading to the arrest of any of the Kinahans, a ban on all US companies from doing business with them, freezing of assets linked to Kinahan's operations worldwide. This was a game changer. Suddenly, Kinahan couldn't use banks, legitimate businesses, or financial services to launder his money. Overnight, he went from a powerful cartel boss to an internationally wanted man. The sanctions also sent shockwaves through the boxing world, where Kinahan had built strong connections. Major promoters and fighters, including Tyson Fury, who had previously worked with Kinahan, were forced to publicly distance themselves from him. Dubai, where Kinahan had been living in luxury, also began cooperating with international authorities. The United Arab Emirates froze cartel-linked bank accounts, marking one of the strongest signals that even his safe haven was no longer secure. With law enforcement agencies from multiple countries working together, Kinahan's days as an untouchable crime boss are numbered. His ability to move money has been crippled, his associates are being arrested, and his former allies in boxing and business have abandoned him. The next step: extradition. Irish authorities, backed by the UK and the US, are pushing for Kinahan to be handed over. However, his location in Dubai makes this complex. The UAE has strict policies on extradition, and while they have cooperated in freezing his assets, they have yet to hand him over to European or American authorities. Still, the pressure is mounting. With a $5 million bounty on his head and a coalition of the world's most powerful law enforcement agencies after him, Kinahan is running out of places to hide. The Kinahan Cartel isn't fully dismantled yet, but its leader is now a fugitive, unable to operate freely. And with every passing day, the question becomes not if, but when Daniel Kinahan will finally be brought to justice. For years, Daniel Kinahan operated in the shadows, untouchable, untraceable, and always one step ahead of the law. His cartel became one of the most powerful criminal organizations in Europe, flooding the streets with drugs, laundering billions, and silencing rivals through brutal violence. But even the most elusive crime lords can't outrun justice forever. The Kinahan name, once synonymous with power and control, is now at the center of a global manhunt. International law enforcement, financial sanctions, and multi-agency investigations have left Kinahan with fewer and fewer options. His top lieutenants are behind bars, his businesses are crumbling, and his former allies are abandoning him. Even his once safe haven in Dubai is no longer guaranteed, as the world's most powerful agencies close in. But despite the damage to his empire, Daniel Kinahan remains a free man, for now. The $5 million bounty on his head ensures that every step he takes is being watched. With his financial networks dismantled and his name blacklisted, His days of living in luxury are slipping away. The world is waiting for the moment he's finally brought to justice. So, will Kinahan meet the same fate as other crime lords, arrested, extradited, and locked away for life? Or will he manage to disappear into the shadows once again? One thing is certain, the Kinahan era is coming to an end. And when the final chapter is written, it will be a lesson that even the most powerful criminals can't outrun the law forever.